Go to TAPgiles.com to learn dreams, engage my services, and support the channel. We're going to make a graph, and there's the 0 of the graph. Right, so there's the x of the graph, there's the y of the graph. So we have like a point there. Another way of thinking about that point is like a line drawn to the point, to the same point. Now this is just like on a graph, and we have, on a graph you have an x coordinate, and how do you know where that is? You kind of imagine an invisible line coming down there. So let's do that. Coming down there, and that's like the x component of this position in the graph. And then we have another one going over there, which is the y component. So the y component is kind of how long this line is, because that's how far you go up. And the x component is kind of how long this line is, or you could imagine it over here. Yeah, this is like the y length, and this is the x length. And you could imagine that same line over there as being down here, because that's the same distance across. So that's the x down there. Just hide those things. You can see we've kind of drawn a triangle, and there'll be some sort of angle down there, some sort of angle up here, and we know what that angle this will be. This will just be perpendicular, so it'll be a right angle down there. There's a little right angle. So this is our point on the graph. We've got this distance over here, so we could actually label that as well. That's the distance of that line. It's like the distance of the point to the 0 is the length of that line. And if you think in terms of classic stuff you might get taught in school, you're probably told that's the angle, and this is the opposite to the angle. This is the adjacent to the angle. It's between the angle and the right angle. And this is the hypotenuse, and that's the longest side of the triangle. But what do we actually get from these functions? So, what does sine do? You give it the angle down here in radians. So that angle there, you plug into there. We get as an output the y length divided by that distance. Yeah, so for sine, you have opposite over hypotenuse. So like divide those. Cosine gives you the relationship between adjacent and hypotenuse, so it's x over the distance. Tangent is the ratio of y and x, so that's y divided by x is what you get out of here. So we've got our degrees in this slider, and then this turns it into radians, and then we wire that into our sine. We get out the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So then if you know what the hypotenuse is, and you want to know what the opposite should be, you can just multiply it by that. The way you'd find the opposite in this case, if you know the distance and the angle, you can put it through a sine calculator and then multiply it by the distance, and you'd get the y pop out. And this is how you get things like, let's write this down, SOHCAHTOA. That's where you get these mnemonics like SOHCAHTOA. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tan or tangent is opposite over adjacent. Yeah, and that's about all there is to it. So before we even had these calculator settings, based on that understanding of like this 2D coordinate thing, I made some logic where it would give you these things, sine, cosine, and tangent, based on the degrees, the angle. And the way that would work is, there's an invisible sculpt. You give it an angle, and it rotates that to that angle. And then it gets this position there, which is always, the hypotenuse is always 1. It's just 1 length, depending on the rotation. and it would get the x, and that's the sine, and the y, and that's the cosine, and then divide the two to get the tangent and just output those. So when you think about it in these geometric ways, it's quite easy to find those things. Now we have these options instead.
Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. Go to patreon.com/TAPgiles to learn something new every day.